because for the first time in history, there is more coffee consumed than coffee produced. These are data from The Economist ICO. Nobody really knows how much coffee gets produced in the world, by the way, and that's the fun part of coffee.
Roasted.
Really expert in that space.
Nobody can beat anymore.
Infused or
For 20, 30 years.
because it tends to be
Their own
When
job.
you were working the land.
$1,000 per
kilo.
Welcome back to the Acid Makes Coffee Better podcast. Today I have Cosimo Libardo. Thank you very much for joining us and thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks. So, can we just start off with who you are, your history in the coffee industry, and then we can see where you are now?
Well, I'm working for a company called Ceado now. Let's start from the end. And I'm also the treasurer of the Specialty Coffee Association. I've been a board member for a few years, and I've been involved with the SCAE before as a volunteer. In my past, I was president of the SCAE as well in 2014. Been 25 years in coffee, expired Q grader and Q processing specialist as well. Started working with equipment, Nuova Simonelli and Vittorio Arduino, got involved with all the competitions and sponsorship terms, then moved to Australia and managed Toby's Estate Coffee for a few years, then moved back to Italy and worked for a company, fully automatic manufacturer, and the reason I was there, though, was the first induction machine. Not having boilers, rather having an induction module that instantly heats up in terms of making efficient both the architecture of machines on the counter and the energy saving aspect of it.
On that energy saving, is there a numbers in terms of like how much of our industry's power consumption is heating up espresso machines? Is there?
Well, there is a number that says that most of the waste happens at a coffee shop level, but it's not just the espresso machine, it's the fridge. There are a number of things. The espresso machine contributes to that. New espresso machines, the modern ones, I have to say, with energy management software now, they do have a huge improvement versus the past. All the insulation the boilers have, boilers are becoming smaller, group heads are becoming smaller, so the masses that dissipate and sort of have that inertial heat got a lot smaller, so the efficiency has really improved. The induction is instant, so the advantage is that you don't have any heat if you don't use it.
What does that mean when you say the induction?
When you
is
press
instant?
the button, the machine heats up in that moment. There isn't a boiler that is hot and helping, water. Having water ready as a reservoir of water. There's nothing.
Is that because there is actually no reservoir and there's just it's actually
it's a pipe where you
and
go
there's something that's super
through.
hot inside
Yeah,
it. Got it.
it's not super hot. It's using magnetic induction to heat the water up through a particular metal. So from the bottom up, it gets heated instantly. And
is the main function like the magnetism creates a certain friction within?
No, it's not. It's the way that it hits the metal. So the magnetic force, there are specific types of metal that get heated instantly by the magnetic force going through it. So basically, it's instant. We got it to be very precise. That was one of the issues. We also made it work in terms of reducing the amount of deposit that it would leave inside, because that was another issue. The advantage of that is that you can create modular machines that you can build like Legos, or you could place on counters in different spots. So there was a project that started, and actually I think just now finally got into the market. With the pandemic, though I didn't stay there, the project was started and then delivered with a little delay, but also the pandemic hasn't helped a lot of companies getting things as fast as they wanted to. And then I started consulting with CMA for Barista Attitude, the machine for the competitions, helping them with that project. And now I'm at Ceado. So it's been 25 plus years in the coffee industry.
Right. Cool. And so treasurer of the SCA, what does that mean?
Well, I'm the one in charge of making sure that I manage the risk and make sure that the association is run properly, following the right process, right protocols, because we represent the membership in a way. The members are the owners of the association. I need to make sure that staff, board follow, comply with the rules. There is no economic or other types of risk. So the treasury is sort of like a guardian
Got it.
in a way.
I think also when people hear, because the SCA is a non-profit, correct?
Yes.
When they hear non-profit, I think that's slightly misleading in terms of, because obviously we want the SCA to actually make profit or reserves and hold those because you need them for investment in the industry, right? Because you have the SCA goal of whatever that is, which we'll talk about. Could you just sort of
Yeah.
talk about that?
Yeah. So, first of all, non-profit associations don't have dividends for the board, and the board will be the members anyway. So, I mean, in reality, the owners, we as a board, volunteer board, we don't own anything. We generate surplus, hopefully, because that's equity, and operating with positive equity is the key. Because if you have negative equity, it means that you're going bankrupt. So either you're a profit or non-profit association having negative equity and spending all the money just for the sake of we have them, we shouldn't have money, we shouldn't make profit, let's spend them, is not the dynamic that works even for a non-profit association. Also, I have to say we are operating under rules that are trying to give us 6 months of operation in terms of the equity we have to cover 6 months. We learned that during the pandemic. The pandemic was a very tough time, and we had a lot of lessons from that time. And so the SCA is operating with a surplus that allows us to operate for at least another 6 months if everything shuts down. Because we have projects we got to give continuity to, we have people that we employ as well, because we're not just an association, we're an employer. We have people that work for the SCA. We need to guarantee continuity for them too. So we have a number of obligations, let's say, both as staff, executives in this case, and board members towards a number of stakeholders that are not just the members in this case. But we look at the industry and definitely the community. Our main focus is that continuity for the SCA means that there is continuity of action also for the industry.
Right, exactly. Continuation of the mission.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think also to do that, to attract, if we want to have a good SCA, we need to attract top talent, right? And
Yes.
So we need to actually pay decent salaries.
Yeah, well,
to do that.
look, getting executives and getting people that have that level of responsibility, the SCA got a lot bigger in the last few years, and the reach is really global now. It's not easy. I mean, I've read a lot of comments on the SCA, but I have to say that the level of professionalism that the SCA now has and the level of governance that is implemented throughout different committees and all the process that is being built in, both from a operational point of view and also from a board control point of view, is unprecedented. So it's a really professional association, and yes, I mean you need to consider that when you consider of what it costs to do certain things. What kind of talent is able to run the association that way?
Because we have to draw them from other industries, which could potentially be
Absolutely
right, be paying
Absolutely.
more or whatever.
Yes.
But I think in saying that, would you also say that the people who are part of the SCA, they're not here necessarily for they're here for the mission?
There are totally motivated people. We have people that are very capable, very different mix of people, both on staff and on the board. We have a truly global board representing all the continents. And that's, for me, that's important because the conversation we have are sometimes some of the best conversations I witnessed I've been on a few boards in my life, and I got to tell you that the SCA board is really made of people that I highly respect as individuals, business owners, but we have also baristas. We have also different ends of the producers. We have at least 3 producers on the board. Now, I wouldn't want to offend anyone because I think maybe it's 4. So, but yeah. Producers are there from different parts of the world. So we try to listen to the whole supply chain. The conversations we have are very deep. We represent continents. We represent different roles in the supply chain because we're a trade association.
Could you just some people might not understand what a board is and what it does. Like, why do you need a board?
Well, the board is basically setting the strategic goals for the association, controlling that, monitoring that they are achieved, supports the staff in achieving them if support is needed by the board, controls the accounts, controls all the activities the association carries on a day-to-day, but also in the short, medium, and long term. So boards are control entities. That boards are elected by the members. So there is an election process. Board members rotate. They have right now a 2-year term. That might change in the future, but that's is going to be set in the bylaws, voted by the members.
And how are those people put forward as candidates?
Well, there is a nominating committee people can nominate anyone. There is a nominating committee that makes a selection of, we normally get a lot of names.
And the nominating committee is trying to allocate, trying to have various different stakeholder positions within this. So we want a couple of producers, we want some equipment manufacturers, we want some...
More complicated than that.
Okay.
We have a matrix that is sort of the talent and representation that exists on the board. And sometimes we need also areas of competence. We need someone who's good with finance or marketing, or that on the board there's not a person that does. So it doesn't matter really if they are a producer or if they have those competencies as an individual. And they can elevate the conversation at board level to sort of analyze different layers and different aspects.
And maybe it would be beneficial if they weren't from the coffee industry because they have a sort of fresh view on things.
We have had conversation about that. We tend to attract a lot of people from the coffee industry, and that's a fact. But I have to say that there is a lot of talent there, and honestly, what I like is the variety makes the good decision. I think. My take on decisions taken is there the right process in place? Because it might be the right decision with the wrong process.
Right.
And normally what that does, or no process at all. And what that does, normally a good decision is good for a certain period of time. Then people come after and say, why did they decide that? Because what you decided in that moment doesn't have a justification. And also in time, things change. So if you have the right process instead, that process can be seen by anyone after. Oh, see, I see why they decide that. Process is the key. A good decision without process is a bad decision.
Right. Because it's about all those decisions over time, right?
Yeah. So the board brings that process together. Committees are formed, groups to work on specific aspects are the ones running all the topics. There is a 5-year strategic plan that we carry out. We have budget, we have forecasts, we check on everything. Everything is scrutinized and we're not friends. We're not a club or a group of, we get elected separately. Sometimes we're competitors on the same board. So we're not even like, and we check, I assure you, everything gets checked. So there is the right process. That's the right process in my opinion.
Okay, cool. So if we could just take a step back, the SCA, why does it exist?
Well, the SCA, there are also people that have a different take on why the SCA should exist. Okay. The reason it exists, though, is a trade association. Okay. And I think it's very important in the current world because we try to create, yes.
What is a trade association?
Well, we promote trade of specialty coffee. That is the simplest definition you can imagine.
But so usually a trade association would be between people who are paying to be like business who would be paying to be part of that trade association. But here we've got
not really. Yes, I mean there is a membership that you can be an individual, a company, you can be a professional, you can be an instructor. There are many different roles in the association.
But that's not standard for a trade. Would that be standard for a trade?
We designed it around the supply chain of specialty coffee. So we actually go from farmer to consumer. That's the trade. It's the industry as a whole. We try to create that link from the beginning to the end. That's our job. Within that, we try to create the framework for the industry to flourish. Okay. And it's become evident more and more after the pandemic. I think the pandemic was a big hard stop for all of us. We had a lot of questions about the future. The SCA itself had to operate, navigating situations that were unpredictable, had to change the shape it had, digitalizing a lot of what it did without having completely systems in place. Now we have them, so we're ready to face a number of different adverse conditions because our continuity provides a framework for companies to operate. The shows, which before were not as important, have become extremely important after.
Shows being like
shows, World of
and
Coffee, Expo, because a lot of businesses and a lot of people that are looking for jobs, including baristas, professional, with those shows, with companies having a market or having the ability to meet with their market, it's key to provide that space. If the SCA didn't exist, that framework will probably other players will come in, but I don't think it will be as efficient or as targeted as the SCA is doing. We now have producers. We created events like the buyer producers, where it's sort of speed dating for producers to find buyers for their coffees. We're trying to provide platforms for the industry to flourish. That's what we do. Is connecting the dots for the people and making connections. It can be digital, it can be physical, but that's what the primary role of the SCA is.
Okay. And so, in terms of like who the SCA serves, it's all of those stakeholders.
Yes, we don't pick one above another. There are parts of the industry that are suffering now. Producers in the barista category are the ones that probably have had the toughest time in the last, the beginning and the end of it, and we're aware. And we need to work on a number of aspects, obviously. We're trying to, and this is not just the SCA, but I think us as an industry, and I'm not speaking about the SCA, we've sold a couple of dreams to the producers that their coffee was going to sell for more. In reality, we've seen that doesn't always happen, even if they make specialty coffee. And to baristas, being a barista was going to be a career on its own. I think those promises have shown from the initial dream, the third wave, the rebels, the industry has changed a lot. The world has changed a lot. And those promises are probably not valid anymore.
What promises?
Well, the fact that we're going to sell more
coffee
for more, and being a barista
career
on its own was going to be a career.
But I mean, if you look at the barista element of that, the problem for me there is that everything is determined by what people are going to pay for a cup of coffee, right? Because everything flows back from there. And I think there's just no room in the cafe model for people to be earning the salaries that would justify that being a full career, just because we haven't been able to find a way to actually make consumers pay more for coffee.
Some consumers pay more for coffee, but it's not on a daily basis.
That makes the impact in the cafe model that allows that barista to have the salary, right?
But it's a number of things. I think it's available income. It's important, and consumers. We are consumers. All of us are consumers, and the available income it's important. I understand that consumers sometimes struggle to pay for a coffee. They don't understand sometimes because that's the problem. I think we have not been extremely efficient in communicating value to them. But that is also.
What do you mean by that, though? Like,
there's an industry. The specialty industry has been very elitist in a way. I was at Toby's. I can give you some examples that are very, very not generic examples. I love to walk into a coffee shop, and there is a coffee that is maybe $60 for 250 grams that is on a shelf, hard to reach, and the price is so small that I'm afraid to touch it, because if I get it in my hands and ask the barista and it's $60 and I don't have that money, people in line would see me putting it back. We haven't made specialty approachable in a number of ways. We were the cool kids. We've been the cool kids for the longest time. We've been acting like that. And I don't say everyone has been doing it that way, but I think the way we approached the consumer was not, in the beginning, was not the right way. I've had many conversations with coffee shop owners on changing the way they display coffee. There is the book from Colin Harmon that talks about what I know about running coffee shops. And that book has a lot of suggestions and tips for coffee shop owners and professionals, baristas that operate in coffee shops, in changing the layout, making everything more approachable for consumers. I don't say that that's the only solution, but that's been a trend for a while that has been going on. And honestly, when we did knowledge talks in Australia with Toby's, Colin Harmon came and gave a talk about that. It was the most attended talk that we ever had, with an average of 150 people per event. and at the end it was a bit like a confessional. The owners were sitting down with Colin for hours, and I had to take him away at a certain point after the event. We had to go home.
Right.
Just chatting and understanding what they could do different, because the failure rate in cafes is very high. There is no preparation. Our industry has sold some promises to some categories, including the coffee shop owners. As I said, specialty school, you're going to be cool, you're going to make money, and it's not easy. Our industry has barriers of entry that are very low, and barriers of exit, that are even lower. So the good news now is that to talk about increasing the price for consumers. The pandemic, people at home have been drinking better coffee. It was this act of self-care. The guy used to drink better flavor. They were drinking instant, they went to capsules. They were drinking capsules, they went to buy an espresso machine for home. If they had an espresso machine, they upgraded the grinder, the machine, and things. They got up. They got up in flavor, because we're in the business of flavor. The reality is that while the two driving forces of the market right now are that on the offer side, the market is consolidating.
Which I think can be a good thing, right? In any market.
Could be.
If there's oversupply, consolidation is good.
Yeah, so consolidation, it's happening. Consolidation both from, even with green coffee, but also with equipment. You got big groups now managing a number of different entities, and more purchases are happening as we speak. And then on the demand side, you got a massification of specialty. Consumers are not intending specialty as we professionals intend it. That's one thing we need to be aware of.
What do you mean by that?
They think of flavor. They don't think of specialty. They don't think of a score. They think of the flavor that they're so.
They think that the experiential part of what's in the cup.
Yeah.
Okay.
Wine, was like that. Many years ago, you would drink wine as table wine, because they give you a little bit of calories and strength to not feel the hard work when you were working the land. My grandfather in Italy used to have a winery of that type, and vineyards. It wasn't quality wine. It was functional wine, you can call it, which is an interesting concept, functional wine, but that's what it is. Beer in England was used to sanitize the water in the morning, was used for breakfast. That was another form of alcohol. Then coffee came, and caffeine replaced a few of these things, giving the strength that we needed, the productivity that we needed. Someone says also that it fueled the Industrial Revolution in a way. But caffeine stayed like that. It's never become a recreational beverage. Wine has become a recreational beverage. You drink wine to experience flavor, to have an experience. Consumers understand that. Coffee right now is at the tipping point that from a functional beverage, instead of thinking of specialty, non-specialty, let's think functional, recreational. How do we make coffee recreational for consumers? That's the real question.
Well, but if you look at those industries as well, like wine and beer, the recreational element comes from the price, right? There's not much recreational low-priced wine.
That's what I'm saying is how we present it. How we present it to consumers is part of the reason why we don't sell coffee as expensive as we could. I think this is my thinking.
Right, okay.
Part of it. I'm not saying that's the only reason. Consumers in some countries like Italy, where I'm from, have been seeing coffee as a post-colonial commodity. I'm never going to spend more than €1.20 for a cup of coffee. Never. It's a cultural thing. It's just for the Brits a cup of tea. It's a cup of tea. You would never spend that much money for a cup of tea.
Someone told me that recently, I can't remember who it was, that someone in Italy was fined for selling
Francesco Sanapo.
For selling an espresso
€2.
that was €2.
Yeah, it was fined because the prices were not, the person that paid €2 got very upset because the price was not, you need to, by the law in Italy, you need to have it on the menu visible by the time they order. He had it somewhere else, but
understood.
Still, I wouldn't have sued.
It was more
I
about
wouldn't
how
have
it's
sued
presented
him
the
for
price,
€2, but yeah. It's interesting. That's how Italy is. Some cultures are like that, but you go to Greece. Greece people are ready to spend that kind. It's a cultural thing. I think it really depends on how. but being a cultural thing, precisely how you present things. Maybe we should move our perspective from the business of coffee to the business of flavor, because I think that's where we're operating. Coffee is becoming also an ingredient for a lot of things. You see beverages in cafes that either have rosemary, lavender, and other coconut milk or coconut oil. They have all kinds of additives, oat milk, the plant-based milks. So coffee is becoming an ingredient of a beverage. It's not a beverage itself anymore. And that's part of what consumers want to experience. Maybe that's the way to present, the way you present it. People are ready to pay more money, not for coffee on its own. Consumers don't think like us. And that's what I'm trying to explain to coffee professionals. We are in the business of flavor.
Right. But I think coming back to that idea of, I mean, you sort of talked about each country or society having their own view of what coffee is. And I categorize coffee consuming areas into kind of like passive consumption or experiential consumption. And I think that is very much dependent on what is the history of coffee. So if you look at America, a lot of Europe, these places are very passive in that they want what they had yesterday. Whereas you're looking at the Middle East or some parts of Asia, they don't really necessarily have that long history of coffee consumption in cafes. And so the rate at which they move ahead into that more experiential part where they are thinking about it more as a recreational beverage instead of that functional element, I think is quite important.
I do think, though, that it really depends on the generation. I've seen new generations across different countries where those cultures, as you said, were passive, not being passive at all. I think
There's definitely
zillennials are starting to drink in the US more cold drinks with coffee in it than hot drinks, which is unprecedented in history. So, and I'm seeing that across different different parts of the world. Maybe you get the big cities in Italy where there is an influx of travelers, tourists, and people there are more, say, modern and travel more. But I think it's by generation that the main driver. Culture matters. So the passive culture could be a factor, but generations are changing that pretty fast. I think from Generation Z, X, Z, the Zillennials, they're starting to change behaviors. And so I expect coffee to become more of an ingredient. And this is the first time in history, and that's where I say coffee consumption as flavor, a vehicle of flavor, not specialty, is massifying, because for the first time in history, there's more coffee consumed than coffee produced. These are data from The Economist ICO. Nobody really knows how much coffee gets produced in the world, by the way, and that's the fun part of coffee. Nobody really has a complete handle. There are numbers that can vary by pretty sizable percentages, above 10% sometimes. But the fun part is that people are drinking more coffee than ever.
And that's, the trend is up.
It's up.
But it's up in terms of it's keeping up with population growth plus, right? So it's like everyone is consuming more coffee, plus there's more people on the planet.
But that's because coffee, as I said, is becoming an ingredient to other drinks. New areas of consumption. Asia, Middle East are growing in the consumption. You're going from the typical cultural coffees they had into more diversified experiences. Or even up in level. As I said, people during the pandemic, a lot of people have been drinking better coffee at home as an act of self-love. You couldn't go out, you couldn't do anything. And they've been starting to experience subscriptions boomed. And those are things that are important. Those things matter. And I think we need to change the approach as an industry. And no, I'm not talking just about specialty. We need to transform coffee from a functional beverage into a recreational beverage. We need to communicate it to consumers in a different way. So far, we've had some success stories, but very few specialty roasters have been able to communicate to consumers effectively.
And that recreational beer, I think a lot of people are going to be thinking, okay, I'm thinking like espresso or cup of V60 or whatever that happens to be. there are you thinking about other avenues like canned products, like
Yes,
right?
RTD with
RTD.
oat milk chocolate. It could be premium ingredients of everything.
So this is the way in which that can have more impact, right?
I
Because
think
it's
consumers get engaged much more by that. Look, I was part of a large corporation that was the third largest beverage corporation in the world. One of the roasteries I worked for, Toby's, was owned by them. And I had the chance to participate into focus groups with consumers, actual consumers in the room. And we went there as the specialty people, wanting to do RTD or specialty and knowing what the outcome was going to be. Well, consumers, unfortunately, very displeasing experience because they didn't think like us at all, at all. So we had to face the hard data and see how much they couldn't care less about specialty and what we were doing. There are consumers that are attracted by it that go for the premium experience just because it's premium sometimes, not because it's specialty. There are consumers that go for the environment. There's Fabiana Carvalho, which is a good friend that is a neuroscientist, and she works. She's also a professor at University of Oxford and University of Southern Minas in Brazil, and she is an expert in flavor perception.
okay.
And she has proven in a number of situations with a number of studies how context matters as much as the content for consumers in perceiving flavor.
Well, you mean the things around the
She did an experiment with a brown bag and a pink bag with the same identical coffee in it for 230 consumers. 95% of them noticed a difference, a repeatable difference. The brown was more chocolatey and hazelnuts. The pink one was fruity, acidic. Same coffee, just different bag.
yeah.
And that's amazing how consumers are not like us in that sense. The coffee people, we're the experts as we consider ourselves. They don't think like us. And we have to understand that to engage with consumers, the model that specialty has created as a riot was very attractive for the values it had more than anything. But then it sort of lost steam over time. Now we're in a phase of massification of flavor. People are wanting the experience, are wanting the great flavors. They want to be exposed to that. They want to be exposed in coffee as a single beverage. They want to be exposed in coffee as an ingredient to another beverage.
So I think if we look at impact in our industry and sort of like taking this example, I think, how do you feel about that idea of within specialty, we kind of want to be doing just, the pure, like making really good coffee, serving them as black coffees, espresso, and milk beverages. But this idea, there's always a tension between that and actually what the consumer wants and how we can have more impact by just serving let's say, traditional specialty type beverages and in that same format.
Well,
Can we have more impact by just getting coffees, putting them in RTDs, capsules, all the
coffee is not something that we decide anymore. If you think coffee was traveling in bags in the 1970s or canisters, if you would, Folgers or Maxwell House, or instant coffee in general, then pods appeared, capsules appeared, vials, cans, sachets. Now coffee travels in so many different types of packaging: parachute coffee, Canton drippers. Coffee now, well, it's not technically, it doesn't contain coffee, but you can do coffee on the go in more places. Coffee now is drank in more places than ever, which are not just a coffee shop. So that's the other part, is how you bring that experience into the intimate place for the consumers, which is their house.
But I mean, in terms of, we talked about there's the least value in that chain delivered to baristas and to farmers, to deliver more value back to farmers.
Well, to deliver more value back to farmers is the big investment the SCA is making right now, in my opinion, which is, first of all, it starts from information, from informing the farmers. The farmers have always been, in a way, their role has been always to make coffee, produce coffee beans, and then the buyer of the roastery or the exporter would take those beans from then on. And very few farmers knew what happened to those beans. The specialty industry has tried to change that with the presenting the pictures of the farmers on the bags, trying to involve them. But very few farmers have the chance to travel to the consuming countries of their coffee, to see their coffee drank by consumers, right? And also because it's not easy, it's impractical. We're not, farmers maybe have other priorities in their life when they live in areas that are extremely challenging. So what we felt was a study we did in terms of understanding what could make the supply chain more sustainable from beginning to end was, first of all, educating farmers on not what coffee sells, is where to sell their coffee, not asking them to change what they do. Because what they do sometimes is limited from where they are, the soil, the altitude, the availability of resources. It's easy to go there and ask them, I want this processing. I don't like fashions in coffee taste. I see some processes appearing in the last 2-3 years that personally I'm not a big fan of as a consumer. But I also ask myself, like, is it possible all producers now are producing coffee this way? Because there is a demand, because we told them to do it as an industry. Is that sustainable? Is that what is going to put bread on their table in the next few years? Too often I see buyers of roasteries go, I want this coffee this way because otherwise I will buy less or I won't buy it because I'm interested just in this type of coffees. And and the buyer is the one managing the conversation, is managing it both from flavor, processing preferences and certain flavors that need to be in the coffee for them to sell it, which is fair. The buyer knows what they want. That's what they want to promote in their market in a way. The other one is the score. The score is not determined by the producer, it's determined by the buyer. Buyer owns the conversation. And we understand that score, despite, the SCA was the one that made that form to create a language to trade coffee in the industry. That was in 2004. We realize how much that has been used, but also is very subjective. It's not an objective element for trade in reality. You need to have panels of few people and you try to objectivize it as much as you can. But there is an element of like and dislike in it.
Are you highlighting the information asymmetry between the buyer and producer often, or are you just saying that in general the buyer just knows what their consumer wants and therefore that's
the producer
that's adding
doesn't.
more subjectivity?
Yeah, I think the buyer is also personal like and dislike. It's not just about the consumer. Some buyers might have flavor preferences and want to design their coffee program in a certain way, Since I turned 50, I like washed, clean coffees. I don't like the funky naturals. Does it mean that I should, all the producers that make funky naturals because they don't have access to water should stop making them? No. So the SCA has been considering that as being one of the elements, definitely the weak links for the industry right now. And that's why the CVA system is something we've been promoting, developing first.
Could you just explain what the CVA system is and what it's actually trying to do?
Yeah. So the CVA is Coffee Value Assessment System. Basically, it should replace the old cupping form. This is to make it short. Cupping of coffee is still a tool that you use for cupping of coffee, but it comes with a number of benefits. The first one is that it's composed of 3 forms. One is the descriptive, the other one is called the affective, and the third one is called the extrinsic.
Could you just quickly explain what that means?
So the descriptive is what you find in the coffee you cup. Describe the flavors, describe the intensity, the body, and that determines sort of comes with a score, like that is the composition of what you find in coffee. The descriptors of flavors are not infinite. Actually, you have to tick some boxes amongst the ones that refer to the flavor wheel and that are coded by UC Davis in the new form with samples that are brown sugar. It's a sample. And the code of reference is that brown sugar sample that UC Davis has in its library. It's like the meter that is in Paris. There are lots of meters out there. There's one original one that is in Paris as a reference for all the rest. We're doing the same for flavors because we want to code them. And I'll tell you at the end why we code them. Then there is the subjective form the affective, which I call subjective, because it's how much I like a certain flavor or dislike it.
Just to come back on this, you're trying to code those flavors
Yes.
so that you're trying to just make flavor as more like as objective as possible, so that
Yes.
we're not using terms like gummy bears and wine gums and
Yeah.
stuff. It's more just like red fruit.
One
or
cupping,
blueberry
a counterculture many years ago on the board that were doing weekly cuppings with their consumers, I found as a descriptor mid-grade bacon.
meat grade bacon.
Mid-grade bacon.
Meat grade bacon. Okay.
Which I couldn't relate to that. But descriptors cannot be anything, especially when you're trying to objectivize things. But that's how it is, though. Cupping is very subjective. That's the reality of it. I'm now exaggerated with the definition, but they could find. Also depends on culture. Certain fruits might not be present in some cultures. You know, in Brazil they don't have blackberries or blueberries. They have a different one that it lives only in Brazil.
Right.
And so sometimes when we translate those information, that's why the codes help us standardizing the information in terms of the compounds that are present in the coffee in reality. That's what we're trying. That is the less romantic way to look at it. But they're the result of that, right? And our palate should tell, as experts, should tell, these are present.
I mean, as a roaster, for example, from our perspective, that is a very hard thing to do, because if you just go with, like, we often do colored fruit. So in this bag, you're going to get red fruit, yellow fruit, whatever. But then if you just keep doing that, it's almost so high level and not specific that all coffees seem to have the same sensory characters. Whereas if you do go down into, okay, this isn't blue fruit or purple fruit, it actually has blueberry, but then you don't deliver. You know, there's that tension always in terms of the communication to the consumer.
Yeah, well, no, but see, we're not there yet. This is when you buy coffee. We're talking about trading coffee now, okay? This is for you as a buyer and a producer. And you have a combination of those flavors. So I very rarely have found, there are a number of boxes to tick there. I never found coffees that were identical or could not be described differently. So describing the coffee as, you know, what you find in it, to me anyway, scientifically is the only objective way of doing it. Then if the way you describe it to the consumer when you sell it, then you can use the language you want. That's on you still. We're not trying to take that away from the roaster. What the part that is interesting is I like or dislike it, because that's when you expose your like or dislike of a certain thing. So I prefer this coffee to another one because I like it more.
Okay.
As a buyer or as a roaster or as a group of people. Then there is the extrinsic form, which is attributes that belong to the farm. It could be the altitude, the origin. Some origins, if you say Kenya, is more known than Congo, for instance, as an origin.
Why is this valuable and as part of that sheet?
It creates value because if you have a farm with a big name, I don't want to drop names of farms, but you're from Panama, let's say. That fact, if coffee from Panama gets traded because it says Panama at a different price or says geisha, even if it's not from Panama, let's call it geisha from Taiwan. I tasted a geisha from Taiwan. Does it have a different appeal than a maracaturra from Taiwan? I think it does. There are extrinsic factors that will determine the final value because it's the coffee value assessment. You're making an assessment of all parameters that create the value of that coffee for you as the buyer.
But how are you coding it? Like, how is the fact that it's from Panama or it's a geisha varietal? How is
the form will create sort of a reference point and creates a dialogue between you and the farmer based on descriptors, preferences, and extrinsic values that are there.
Okay.
Now, you determine a value for that coffee when you're purchasing it. But the great information is that value could change depending on who the buyer is. So to use a score comparisons, a coffee that is 87 is not anymore 87. It's 87 for you here in Dubai. It could be an 89 for a buyer in China. It could be an 85 for a buyer in the US.
I feel like maybe I'm missing something. I'm just going to, if I'm a buyer and I go and cup a coffee and I don't use a score sheet, and let's say I'm in Panama or I'm in Taiwan, and I go, based on how that coffee tastes, I think I can sell this at X, therefore I'm willing to pay you $30 per pound for that coffee.
Fantastic.
Would you like to do that?
Yes, and so
But I don't need a sheet to do that. Do you know?
no,
as
you
a
don't.
buyer.
But no, you don't. But that's where I think the buyer also. That's how it's been managed, where the roaster has been owning the conversation.
Okay, explain that. What do you mean?
Yeah, the roaster knows his market. The producer doesn't know the market. The producer finds the roasters that go to him.
Okay, so kind of like the more purpose here is to have information flowing to
What
the
we're
producer.
trying to do is create the sustainability comes from making the exchange more equal, having both having informations. The coffee value assessment system is not really designed to help the buyer buying better at a lower price.
Okay.
It's designed to help the producer fetch a better price when they're selling, because in the end, then we can talk about sustainability, but it comes also from the ability we give to these people to live on their land and to reinvest in what they're doing. Because the market price based on the C market plus a premium, that's how coffee gets traded, specialty coffee gets traded. To me, it's a mechanism that a bit flawed, if you ask me personally. But we cannot talk about price fixing, but we can help creating the parameters. So if the producer has all the informations about the flavors that he or she produces on the farm, without strange processing methods that are asked year from year that they need to invest a lot of money to create when they don't have the resources to do. Otherwise, they don't sell their coffee.
Right.
Rather say, this is the coffee I have. Based on those codes that I've seen now, the SCA will know, for instance, where certain flavors are more popular than others, and the producer can access those informations and will know which is the ideal market for the coffees they actually make, not the coffees that they're asked to make.
So I mean, this is trying to address the information asymmetry between the brown side of coffee and the green side of coffee.
Absolutely. The
But
consumer will have flavor preferences. The roaster will buy the coffees based on consumer flavor references, right? Although the roaster can influence those. But when you start having data from all companies in a certain market and you start putting in there, the big data are filtering the subjectivity of it out. Providing those flavor preferences, they help all the supply chain. Once you start having those data available also as a roaster, you start knowing what your market is buying.
But for me, I think this helps not the people who are super educated or the people in Panama. This helps the people who are, let's say, less educated or less have less information about this value system. And then so like how do we not enforce, but help this be put in place between when those transactions are happening between the green buyers and the people who are actually farmers?
Well, we're working with a lot of the coffee associations now and teaching this new methodology to a lot of the producers. We have just signed a memorandum of understanding with ICO to distribute that knowledge at origin. And we have 3 or 4 more things coming up. So what the SCA has historically never touched was the relationship with origin. It was delegated by other entities that were created specifically for that. But we realized that in order to make, in this current situation, we need to have a different role in terms of influencing how coffee is traded and creating a better link and knowledge across the supply chain about what consumer preferences are in a market, business of flavor. Although the SCA officially, this is my definition of it. I want to make sure that you understand that this is not the SCA's definition, but that's what I call it. We all operate, is not just that, but yes, we operate in that macro arena. We also have hospitality, which is another reference point should be for our industry, which we don't sometimes look at as we should, but that's another conversation. So we're trying to create the link between flavor preferences from consumers and what gets produced at origin and create those links in finding the right market for the right coffee. Because that's the ultimate goal. And obviously, there's been a massive investment that we're putting into this. This is a multi-year project. That this is the biggest project the SCA has ever carried out in history, I think.
Because you think that getting that information to the producer has the ability to make that impact. And
It's one of the many things, but we cannot do what governments need to do. But getting the producers to, first of all, communicate the processing, communicate the elevation, communicate what they're doing, and getting a fair price for what they're doing, not based on the C market. Because the problem right now is that the C market, it might be very good for them some years, but very bad. And this is also very unsustainable for the whole supply chain, if you think of it. What is the fair price for a coffee should be not determined based on the C. The C was created for other reasons. There's been a big debate for years on that. Then we sort of went away, turned our attention as an industry to other things. But the reality is the way we trade coffee is not sustainable.
Yeah, and I think, but if we also look at the impact that we have as the specialty market, I don't know if we can we have the impact that we want to have, or is that just big companies that can do that? Is it only companies like Nestle and Starbucks and all these larger, let's say holding groups maybe, that own these brands? Are these the ones that need to be paying more to have, can they only have impact?
I don't know. I don't think the coffee.
We can impact the individual farmers and maybe those farms, but is it enough?
I think it will definitely create a model of reference that is different from what has been used till now, which farmers then they can adopt. They can choose if they want to sell to a big organization at rules that are set between them and the big organization, or given the demand is surpassing production, find another market for their coffees. I think providing alternatives and a different model of reference is actually opening opportunities. And I don't expect everyone to jump on that bandwagon right away, but we've seen a lot of traction from this. A lot of associations are very interested to talk. A lot of producers are getting trained. There's been a massive investment. Maybe it went under the radar. It was launched in Portland at Expo, so that was April, not even a year that this has been launched. There was a lot of resistance versus what we need to surpass right now is the resistance to the old cupping form, the affection to the old cupping form method. But this is a way to determine value that is more objective and will create a better link with the final consumer. A lot more complicated to understand. That's why there are classes on that.
And also, I see some potential incentive issues there as well, because the people who are going to be using that a lot are the brown coffee, like roasted coffee, when I say that, versus the people that really benefit from it are the green coffee, like it's the farmers, right? So there's kind of like an incentive issue.
We, as an industry, have tried to set the example for a number of things for others, right? And I've heard so many conversations now we should pay more for coffee. And now that we're given the opportunity, I'm really curious to see what the industry will do for real.
We were just chatting about kind of the future of the industry and the future of the cafe sort of model in general. How do you think that's going to change over the next, let's say, 10 years? You're saying that AI hasn't really kind of
hit the coffee scene yet, but it will eventually.
Yeah. How do you
chips and technologies that will?
Well, I mean, we're seeing algorithms, which is kind of like the base starting place of AI, right? You were saying we've got grinders that talk to espresso machines, and so how is this line of reasoning? How's it going to change the role of the barista in that cafe function?
I think more than the tools used, what is changing it is the demand for standardization of the final drink in the cup. I think the baristas will have a different role. They're already having it because, as I was saying before to you during the break, the Uber Milk, the pack presses of the world and grinders that are smart and think for you, and the new algorithms, there'll be new chips coming. You know, the industry normally works with suppliers that come in, hey, we got this new thing. You want to try it on your espresso machine? And so it's all driven by other industries. Sometimes the coffee industry, the manufacturing industry for equipment in coffee, gets a lot of technologies that come from the medical industry, the automotive industry. So I just waiting for that to happen when those chips are going to become available. I imagine there are a lot of manufacturers, both of traditional and fully automatic, they will try to incorporate that in their equipment. What makes coffee in a way so romantic is that our industry doesn't have the ability to buy the quantities. Most of our manufacturers don't have the ability to buy the quantities that are required for those chips usually. So they always come at the end of their life cycle,
Of the innovation cycle.
of the
when it's
innovation
very cheap.
cycle, when it gets cheap, when smaller quantities are available. And normally that's what I've seen as a trend operating in manufacturing of equipment across different types of operators, different types of companies. So yeah, I think automation is definitely a driver. Smart equipment, let's call it. That could be a fully automatic, could be a traditional, could be you got perfect mousse, a latte art factory, you name it. The milk side of things has been, because for workflow, you need one less barista to produce, or less space, less equipment to produce in a very small amount of space what is needed in peak hours, especially to face any demand. And that's an interesting driver. I think standardization, as I said, is the other one of the final drink. Chains are pushing for that. Coffee shop owners are pushing for that. But
You're saying the automation will result in a more standardized beverage format?
right now, that's the expectation. Automation should help two things: workflow, facing peak time, and serving on average a more standardized, a more similar drink. Just 10 years ago, when you went into a coffee house, you ordered 3 espressos. Would they come out the same way? Well, I have an answer for that. No. I went to visit a lot of cafes and I would have sometimes terrible experiences. Now, espresso machines with a multi-boiler, all the technology that goes into controlling pressure and temperature. Now there are probably 70 espresso machines out there that can brew fantastic coffee. Now the part that is the very interesting part is the grinder, because the grinder actually now affects 80% of the flavor you extract comes from the grinder, which for hundreds of years has been looked at as a commodity. Now grinders are becoming the new area of investment for new technology, and there are the grind by weight grinders that are, now you see everywhere. There are other technologies that are happening and appearing on the scene. I work for a grinder company, so I don't want to self-advocate, but I can reassure you that there are a number of other technologies.
So when you say that the grinders are responsible for 80% of the flavor in the cup, what do you mean by that?
Well, just by the geometry of the birds, the material you use for the coating, the base of the bird. I've had first-hand experience on how you can massively determine or change the flavor. I can add that one of the grinders we make are inverting the rotation of the burrs for each shot, getting rid of all the coffee that is trapped between the burrs. And that results in a much clearer shot and a very different flavor from grinders that have that retention from shot to shot. So grinders the technology in grinders, the design of the burrs, the flow of coffee from the hopper to the exit do affect massively the flavor, the likelihood to extract certain flavors. For instance, this particular grinder that we have adds a lot of clarity to the cup. Same coffee done with 2 grinders side by side, you notice the difference in a substantial way.
Coming back to that automation thing, just before we move on though, I kind of see automation as a way for the cafe model to maybe hire less people, make in terms of the people that are doing that functional stuff, and then maybe pay baristas. That's a way for baristas to be paid more. Because now you have one person who's kind of, as you said, doing that quality control, kind of managing that bar, and maybe that allows the cafe owner to pay that person more. But then if we get industry-wide adoption of that, then everyone starts to everyone starts to maybe, let's say, make more money per cup because they're spending less per cup, and then we get people wanting to compete on price again. So everyone's doing the same level of standardization, and so then they start to compete by, okay, well, maybe I can just make my cup a little cheaper.
I
And so we
don't
have the
know.
same-
Like I don't know. I'm not that resolute about how it's gonna go. I think that the role of the barista is changing because of automation, and we haven't really catered to that as an industry. So, but we know that automation is in demand in many areas of the world because of it's hard to find trained baristas, but that's because also trained baristas or the barista profession is less attractive to a lot of people. So there are less people interested in becoming a barista for a living, right? So, but that's where it gets sticky because it's sort of the chicken and the egg. We need to break that circle in a way to motivate or make of being a barista profession again, because I think it's a lovely profession that we've invested as an industry on teaching people how to make great coffee. The technical part of it has been at the beginning, we didn't have enough people that knew how to make great coffee. Now we have trained all the people we could, and most of the people we could. I find the people that are in coffee and have had that career, they do know how to, for the most part, they do know. The average level has increased massively. But now that profession is less attractive. It requires a lot of effort, requires difficult hours. And that's where automation is now the consequence, because you say there is less people. So we want machines to help the people doing that job. My question is, because the role has changed, now the barista is more quality control, but it's also, there is another element that doesn't get mentioned as often as I would like to see, which is hospitality, because how you make the customer feel while they're waiting in line, how you treat them is the point of differentiation to compete, not just on price. Because how you make people feel is the key for them to pay a better price. And we're going back to industry consumer. Consumers don't think like the industry professionals. And this is something we need to start to be aware of when we predict the future.
Before we jump into hospitality, because it's a great point, but can I just play devil's advocate on the training point?
You sure
'Cause
can.
I've often thought that we are potentially overtraining people, and
Could be.
and why I say that is that everything has to be paid for by the cup of coffee, and how much consumers are willing to pay for that cup. And I think that there's not enough money in the system within each cafe, mainly because there's oversupply of everything, to actually justify the salary that goes to a barista who is trained. I think that we're promoting this. We need to have all these trainings, foundation, intermediate, professional, and there's no way for that person to actually, in that barista role, pay back that, or for the cafe owner to have that payback on the knowledge that they have, because they just, often they can't actually deliver that knowledge, or not deliver that, use the knowledge to deliver more value in the cup.
Yeah, I think, that's where we need to work as an industry to provide a different angle to that. You're right when you say all that investment. So there was a moment in time where the problem for roasters was to scale quality, to do quality control, and to make sure that all the customers they had were brewing the coffee they were roasting in the right way. Making flavor scalable or specialty scalable has been the trickiest part for the longest time. It's interesting to me to see now that the mums and pops independents are starting to become less and less, also for access to credit, because to money, given the current situation. Consider that in some countries like Australia, though, the failure rate of cafes in the first year of life was sometimes up to 60%. Those were data from Silver Chef, which was doing leasings, and within 3 years reached even 75%. So the independents there's been a high mortality rate in cafes, which is also as a cost that our industry doesn't account for. It's a hidden cost that we don't want to look at because we want to be successful and look at ourselves like we've done things right and we're doing the right thing as an industry. Reality is, for the ones that are successful,
There's a graveyard.
another 6-7 people dead. So the model has been imperfect. Not that this was perfect and now it is imperfect. It always has been imperfect. And now with the consolidation on the offer is also happening at cafe level, because to pay the rent or to have the money to operate cafes, now the groups are starting to 5, 10, 15 cafes, 20, 500 are starting to become more common, serving specialty coffee, which was never seen it before. And obviously those people have a much more attention to standardizing the experience in all these locations. I can name you I don't think 100, but a few tens of specialty chains, which before didn't exist. It was a concept that was against the idea of specialty, so to speak. And they look at standardizing the extraction. So on a critical mass of that size, you could pay, but you could justify that training because that for them is critical for them to deliver. And that's where the barista has a different role, because the quality control and the trainers are very much needed. Some of them might see it as a necessary evil. Some of them make it part of what their culture is. I know some very virtuous chains that are thinking like that. They are really, really respect, because they want to create that experience and they don't compromise or do shortcuts.
So given that, then, given where you think the industry may go, what do training curriculums look like in the future, and what do you kind of see for training?
It's an interesting question, because I give you an answer that comes from an article that I read many years ago about AI and the impact of AI on jobs in general, and it said basically two things: the two biggest courses, the two biggest areas where you should tell your kids, the younger generations, anyways, anyone that comes behind you that is studying right now, tell them to study two things: IT, programming, or philosophy. Because one thing that can be replaced is the emotional revenue that a barista can generate. The machines will never be able to replace that. The human approach to a customer smile that you get when you get in, engaging in a conversation, offering hospitality, is how you make people feel while they're drinking that cup of coffee. And that has a huge impact on them coming back. That's where the most value right now can be created by humans, more than machines. And it sounds very romantic and sort of idealistic, but in reality, we have commoditized for many years hospitality under the label of service, and service is not hospitality. As Will Guidara, which I was quoting you earlier, which is a famous chef that operated the restaurant that won the best restaurant in the world, was 11 Madison Avenue. He wrote this book about unreasonable hospitality, which I won't give away. But when he interviewed people working there, he was putting a focus on hospitality. The key thing where everybody could make food, the same thing you said. He says it in the book. Everyone can make food as good because it's the ingredients how you cook it. There are so many good chefs out there that can do the same thing we do. But one thing they can't do is our level of hospitality is unreasonable. And they were doing things that consumers would relate to and come back to experience it again. The food was just the basis for that experience. It wasn't the experience itself. Well, I think the role of the barista, the profession of being a barista, needs to get that injection. We cannot teach people only how to make great coffee. I think there are great professionals out there that would be very happy to be exposed, because it's also a transferable skill. You don't want to be a barista the rest of your life. You can use that skill to find another job, become a manager of a cafe or a restaurant, or move to another part of the industry, of the food and beverage industry with that. I think it's very important that we consider that.
But also that restaurant fine dining model is more of a recreational. So that would kind of also depend on that consumer going in for not functional coffee. They are going in for a slightly more recreational, or that the functional coffee, but they're willing to pay a premium. for it?
Well, there are many ways to tackle that. For instance, you can create different experience paths inside the same location. You might have the
but I'm
customer
thinking
on the
like
go.
before the customer even they've thought like I'm gonna get my coffee from blah, and then they decide to it's because the thought process on whether they want to go to X cafe or Y cafe is already done before. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah.
Whether they
Well,
want
it's word.
functional
There
or-
are many different ways to do it, but they don't think of functional, recreational. They want to have an experience. So either convenience is the driver of their choice. They're on the way to work. So location matters. Where it is, it's easy to reach. Do I have to get off my car? Drive-throughs grew on rain and that being available where people are passing with their car on the way to work, so they don't lose time to get their coffee or make it at home and stuff like that. That's the extreme. But otherwise, if you're not operating a drive-through and you're not operating on complete and total functionality on the go, then you have to look at many aspects. Is how you engage emotionally with your customers and give them reasons to come back. And that's the part that we focus a lot of attention on transactional revenue. That's what drives a lot of decisions for coffee shop owners. And I think the designing the emotional revenue that you deliver while doing that, it's very much overlooked. I mean, many cafes are built by an architect or someone before the workflow gets analyzed. And workflow is in the emotional revenue design, it's a workflow format. So how things, people, and information flow. Format, what we do and how we do it. Like, are we a plant-based, milk-only cafe that vegan? We serve only that kind of product. We communicate that clearly, right? And so that's and layout, how things are distributed physically. That's the body language of our business. Those three things contribute to create an emotional response. But we need to design them. I find very few cafes that do that. I can tell a cafe that has done that from one that doesn't when I walk in. Then there is the emotional revenue. The emotional revenue is the look and feel. I've been working in marketing and sales for my life, and brand books, and we look about the material. I work with architects. I've been consulting to make cafes in my past, and the look and feel, the materials, the lines are very important. But sometimes there's one thing that I always preach about is rituals. Build rituals that represent who you are in what you do, sorry. It's critical. You should know what are the values, why the customer should understand why you do what you do. Why you do what you do, what motivates you to operate that shop that is not just making money. Consumers today want to know that, want to relate to that. You need to build a community around what you do if you want consumers to come back.
And in the cafe, could you give an example of what that is in the cafe space?
Well,
we're here to serve you, or we're here to
biggest
make your
ritual
day?
that was built in Italy in the 60s when baristas had their white shirt and a bow tie was il solito, which means the usual. You walked in, the barista would tell you the usual. You felt so good because, first of all, you were a person that was going there repeatedly. You didn't have to say, you felt important. You felt that you had a spotlight on you, but by making you feel good. An example of something that Will Guidara talks about, he has a nice podcast, and he has also, I'm not trying to direct people on the competition, and he wrote this book and he has an Instagram account. I suggest people to really listen to what he says, and it inspired me a lot, where he said, 5 guys, the people that make burgers, what they understood was the time that was most important is when the burger was ordered and they had to wait for it to be prepared. So they created containers with peanuts. You had to shell these peanuts like they were. And while you were waiting,
By the time.
you were just shelling peanuts and eating them. And that became a people started posting about this thing all over social media. And they became famous for that ritual. Rituals are ingrained in who you are. So understanding which are your values and your culture and identity is clear, needs to be clear, before you can propose a ritual that has to be consistent and coherent with that. You can't just make up rituals artificially. It needs to. They need to represent who you are. I find cafes that are beautiful without a soul very often, and that's where automation is perfect in a way, because but automation links to convenience more to experience, right? So our industry hasn't put enough focus, and I think it's the solution for a lot of things, starting from the baristas having a career, getting a better pay, and having a more sustainable future in coffee, because I think that's a very transferable skill. That's what we need everywhere as a society in the future.
Yeah, there's so many things I want to talk to you about. There's so many
It's
different
fine.
avenues. But I think before I'm very wary of the time. I would love to talk about barista competitions, advice for aspiring coffee professionals, what you think they should do, given what we've just talked about, and then what you think the future of the coffee industry holds for us. Starting with
Small questions.
small questions, just quickly. The main function in terms of SCA of what barista what's the value of a barista competition?
Well, I think
As per CA.
barista competitions are they started to provide, again, they started in a different time where the industry specialty was small, and we needed to inspire the industry in a way and create models, role models. The world champions were role models that people would follow. Now we have so many that got a bit diluted over time, if you want, but still they do have an impact. A lot of companies are listening to them. Consultancy now, world champions are becoming consultants of many brands. So their role and the way they operate within the industry has changed, which is good. I mean, it has an impact. It still vehicles that message, and that's why, as an area of influence, specialty coffee is not the part of the industry that is suffering in a way, or is suffering less than others, for sure, because we've been able to influence the whole industry. Specialty coffee before used to be a niche of the market. Now it's the market, because it's the model of reference. Even for chains or commercial, they look at what specialty coffee does. Either they do it or not. Specialty coffee is the reference for everyone now. And barista competitions have had a big role. And that's why now the competitors, the best baristas, become consultants to a lot of companies that are outside typically of specialty, but they want to understand and learn how specialty operates. The other contribution that I think competitions have given into the industry is innovation. A lot of tools, a lot of things that appeared on stage have then become something that you see in cafes. It doesn't always happen, but it's an area where innovation happens. And that's why we also try to incorporate in competitions, as a rule, what is actually out in the real world. We don't want to have competitions being a separate environment. I mean, they're a bit the Formula One, if you will, of coffee, yes. Right. But Formula One, for instance, the cares, the recovering energy while you break, you sort of find it in cars afterwards, right? And that's what we want to see the competitions being. We introduced a few rules where we opened up the competitions to other things you find out there, which are plant-based milk and possibility of automation in some areas. But that's because we need to be linked to the real world out there, and we can't keep the competitions a dogmatic place or a sacred temple of something that doesn't exist anymore or exists only partially. Because the reality that we're facing out there is what we described before. So the role of competitions for us is really to create a link with the real world and influence the real world right now. That's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, I think if I can also play devil's advocate on that, I think that potentially the competition scene has kind of morphed a little bit into something that maybe maybe it needs like a revamp in terms of how it can provide value back to the industry to the areas that need it more, perhaps.
Yes, we're always open for suggestions.
Is there any talk of the competition scene maybe morphing into something, or the different format, or?
Look, proposals for formats, there is a committee that analyzes that, made of people that come from the industry. These are people that actually there was recently the SCA published an opening for roles into the strategic committee for competition. So we actually receive applications.
Right. Yeah.
So it's a very open
And there's a lot of competitors on there, like champions. which are on that board,
competitors,
right?
judges. You got people that are part of that. But anything we do, as I told you at the beginning, we're process. So, for instance, when we do all the selection of any type of sponsor equipment, there are competitors, there are judges involved in the process, there are the people, technical committees that are formed. We don't get to decision just by, hey, I got a friend that has a machine. Would you like to? I think they should. That doesn't exist. Might be the perception sometimes I perceive from social media, the comments I receive. There's been years of technical committee testing involving all the manufacturers, getting their people on the committee, getting standards being made for protocols, getting the champions involved, getting judges involved, and that's been a process that leads to decisions. So it's a pretty well-structured process. And then, there's always going to be someone that agrees or disagrees with it, but the reality, there is a process. I might not like personally the decision, right? But there is as I told you at the beginning, if the process is right, that's what matters for me.
We're about to go in a couple of minutes to the World of Coffee of Dubai. These are amazing trade things where people can come and connect, meet new people, do business. But it also seems like the people who can attend those things are the people who are the more fortunate people within that coffee thing, whether that's the roasted side, barista side, cafe, or green producer. Is there a way that we can kind of create industry things for maybe the people who don't have access to, let's say, travel, or is there ways that we can?
What we've tried to do as an association is to bring events closer to them. Consider the World of Coffee Dubai didn't even exist a few years ago. We're now having events in
Panama.
Panama is going to help producers. I think it's going to be an inspiration. Speaking of inspiration, an inspiration to a lot of producers. They're going to see Panama is the sacred place for a lot of producers where the guys that did it there, and girls, because fortunately there are also women there amongst producers. They have been extremely successful to create a model around what they do. And I was there meeting with all of them. It was so interesting how they work together. And that was one of the key points that I found super interesting about the history of Panama. And now they created, with their own means, and again, with what they had available, they told us that Panama didn't exist. It was interesting to listen to them and hearing them say, we were planting asparagus and different types of tomatoes, but we didn't know if coffee was going to make our living. Then we isolated the geisha on the Esmeralda farm. And then from there, we started building on that, trying to communicate it as a group. We were sleeping in the same rooms all together, trying to go to SCA and present geisha as a different product at a different taste. But nothing was gifted to them. Now they're the ones that made it in a way, and obviously they sell their coffee in the most expensive coffee in the world. But it was the unity that you don't find sometimes in other countries amongst producers. That was one of the key elements. It was so interesting to see that. So I think bringing people to be exposed to success stories and to connect, again, that's our job. That's what the SCA tries to do. But we're trying to regionalize with a huge effort, because imagine how much work it goes into producing the shows, in having staff traveling, and helping the local organizations creating a positive experience, not just an experience. Because we are there, our teams travel everywhere to monitor the content, to monitor the format, to help the local organizations that whenever we don't produce it directly, we produce the two big shows, our Expo in US and World of Coffee in Europe. And those are directly produced by us because of history. But we then started to license the shows, but we go there and help the local organizations, creating a successful show. Busan is World of Coffee Asia, and we intend to regionalize in Asia the World of Coffee, Central South America, the Middle East. We're now trying to have a much wider reach than we ever had before.
Okay, so if we look at the future now, advice for aspiring coffee professionals, whether a barista, roaster, what would you say, given how this industry is kind of going to change in the next sort of 5 to 10 years?
Well, I think they need to work, they need to develop transferable skills together with coffee. I think there is a much, and this is more, rather than being a member of the SA, I'm talking about an employer, as an employer, potential employer of those people having been managing a roastery or manufacturing plants for equipment of different kind. Or a distributor as well of equipment. What you're looking for is someone that has that depth of knowledge, not just technically about the product, that narrow knowledge, but you want them to have other transferable skills around that. So the more transferable skills you develop, hospitality is one of them.
I think hospitality is great because if you think about your boss is your customer, right? And you can
Yes.
use the hospitality model to figure out exactly. And
Hospitality
employ
takes
that.
you in a number of areas. Obviously, management and business. We can, but employers that see potential also invest. I suggest also to companies to invest in their people that are more talented or more willing to learn. Not just with the coffee training. Rather, I've done that when I was in Australia, helping people getting degrees of other kinds of marketing, communication. So trying to help people. Sit down with them and ask them, okay, so our journey is not going to be together for the rest of our lives. But until the moment we separate, how can we create value for each other? And that to me is the key conversation that needs to happen more often, bidirectionally. I think the barista profession is changed nowadays, and that's why there is this level of uncomfort because the promise, as I said at the beginning, is not there. It cannot be there anymore because of how things have evolved. But I think we also can help evolving the role of barista. The role of barista is still one of the most important, the customer-facing role. Machines will never replace humans in talking to other humans. There's no way. They can be fun, they can be convenient, but over time, the human factor makes a difference. And I think we need to leave the approach that we always had about we just make coffee, we focus on the machine, on the cup, we don't focus on the person. Quality control alone as a role will not be enough. I think we need to start talking to people, and they need it, trust me. In Italy, the barista is a psychologist too. A lot of customers don't go to coffee shops for coffee. They go there to get a quick, cheap psychology session. Yeah. With a professional psychologist, which is the barista. So that's where Italy is known. We joke about it, but I'm obviously exaggerating and joking. But the reality is that the hospitality aspect of being in that role has been underlooked for too long, and I think it's time that both employers and the baristas are investing in that.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
It's been a great podcast. I hope we can do it again, actually.
Yeah.
Somewhere, sometime.
Absolutely. Thank you for inviting me.